Hey guys, so I know I recently did the breakdown of YCS Utrecht, but we just got Darkwing Blast, so I wanted to make sure I break down the most played hand traps and staples at YCS Minneapolis this past weekend. Now before I continue, a big thanks to my sponsors as usual. Make sure to check out my links for discounts on Yu-Gi-Oh supplies. So now this was the breakdown of the top 32 for YCS Minneapolis, and a big thanks to the Carlancha store for not only creating this breakdown, but also for providing all of the deck list visuals that were used for my video. Definitely go check them out on Facebook, links down below. As you can see from this graph, we now have a ton of Teralaments variants top, so a bit of a flip from Utrecht where Spright took up the majority of top cut. We also again see Floowandereeze top, even coming second place, as well as Bystial making its presence known in Dragon Link and Thunder Dragon lists, as well as a lot of players lists as a hand trap. Now in terms of this video, I had 23 of the 32 topping lists available to work with for the breakdown, so this is the pie chart of the lists included. So for the most part, it does reflect the overall top 32 breakdown, which is a good sign. But a lot of the hand traps and staples will be more reflective of Teralaments decks since they took up essentially half of the representation, so keep that in mind. As for an overview of hand traps, the median number has now risen to 6 again, which is around the usual mark and up from a median of just 3 at YCS Utrecht just a week ago. Now keep in mind that the use of Bystials is increasing the hand trap count notably, and for some of the topping lists, the Bystial monsters are actually an integral part of the deck strategy and not merely as hand traps, but it is a hand trap nonetheless, so they were categorized that way for the purpose of this video. In the side there was a median of 3 hand traps, which is about the same as usual and the same as last week at Utrecht. Now as for going second board breakers, the median number is at 3, which is slightly lower than the 4 we saw at Utrecht, but 3 is usually the number you see in a lot of the formats. Keep in mind that I decided to categorize Kashtira Fenrir as a board breaker for this video since Pankratops is categorized that way as well. While Fenrir can be used going first as well, some people were citing it as a going second option, so I wanted to categorize it as a board breaker. Let me know your thoughts on this. Anyways, on the side, the median was 6 board breakers, again in the same ballpark as last week at Utrecht. So to cover the top 10 most played hand traps, we start with Bystial Magnamut, and with this image, this is also representing Druid's Worm as well, because they're always played together. Now as I said earlier, for some of the topping lists, Bystials were actually a core part of their strategy, and not just a hand trap, but other lists were playing it purely for the sake of a hand trap, so I categorized them that way. Fenrir was also played in 6 lists as well, but I didn't want to take up a separate slot in this video for it, since I wanted to talk about Bystials all at once. This is essentially the new DD Crow, albeit with heavier restrictions since it can only banish light or dark monsters, and it is only a quick effect if your opponent controls monsters, but in this format that's not that hard to meet, and it gives you a really heavy 2500 body with additional effects that's nice. They are also level 6s, so if you can get multiple Bystials on board, you can go into Beatrice and dump something like Merle and go off from there. And number 2 is Infinite Impermanence, and you'll notice that this was only played in 8 of the 23 lists, and yet it was the second most played hand trap. For this YCS, I noticed that there was a great diversity in the hand traps and staples played among the lists, and nothing too unanimous, which is why that explains the low counts for all the different hand traps I'll be showing. Really strong right now, and if you're playing hand traps in your deck, this is probably one of the first ones to consider since it can hit essentially any deck. Then a third is Gamma, which is mostly sided if played, that has slowly started to see resurgence in play after Spright became popular, since resolving this on their normal sum effect could possibly just end their turn. Playing the driver sucks, but some may consider it to be worth it. At fourth we have Dimension Shifter, which is of course a Floowandereeze special, but some Spright lists do play it as well. Probably the strongest hand trap if your deck is able to play it, and can really end turns in games. At fifth we have Ash, which has lost its number 1 spot a while back, but still seeing play as it is one of the most generic hand traps despite it being considered as low impact. As usual, this card is only main decked if played at all. Next we have DD Crow, where despite the release of the Bystial cards, this card still saw a bit of play since it can also hit spells and traps and can prove to be useful. It's also something Floowandereeze typically tend to play since it is searchable for them. Next we have Effect Failure, which along the lines of Imperm, monster negation hand traps are always good and can hit pretty much most decks. Then we have yet another monster negation hand trap in Ghost Mourner, which also saw decent play at Utrecht as seen in my breakdown. It has an additional effect of burning the opponent, which can be very useful in the current format where so many players are playing cards like Red Resonator and Skullmark Ladybark to squeeze out that win in time. Speaking of winning in time, we then have Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood to try to gain a lot of life as your opponent's special summons. Originally when it first came out it never saw any play, but starting with YCS Niagara, a small handful of topping lists were playing it and brought it to other players' attention. Certainly not a guaranteed win even if you resolve it of course, but having tens of thousands of life points will at least give you some turns to survive and clap back. Lastly, we had roll in just 2 lists, which is a card worth considering in the current format. Kashtira Fenrir is a staple that may be seen in a lot of different decks, so since they would always start with summoning that and possibly using its effect to search, that's an easy draw right there. As for the most played side deck staples, we start with Cosmic Cyclone yet again since Red Reboot is no longer with us. As mentioned with the hand traps, we do see that there's no real unanimous choices in side deck staples since Cosmic was seen in 15 of the 23 lists and was still the most played staple. Grayed out to many back row cards, especially against tier when everything seems to trigger when they're sent to the grave, not to mention against Mystic Mind through the protection effect of Hugin. Next we have Talents, which has soared in popularity lately, especially in Runic Spright lists for example. Monster effects in the main phase are very common in the current format, so you can probably get this live most often, although when it's dead, boy does it feel bad. We also have the new Triple Tactics card to prepare for in the near future as well. At third we have Evenly Matched, which was the second most played staple at YCS Utrecht. Some people were even main decking this card, particularly the Floowandereeze players, since you're not always going to win the die roll, and this card is probably the best going second card right now. Next we have Super Poly, which of course is largely influenced by the fact that about half of the lists included in this video involve Teralaments. I think many Spright players are playing around Super Poly right now so that their end board doesn't get Garuru'd, but likely there's an opportunity to play this against a lot of decks, so it's a staple in tiers. Then we have Call by the Grave, which was main decked only this time around, at least in the topping lists that were available. Nothing more to say about this card other than that it's very versatile and can do much more than just stopping hand traps. Next we have Dark Ruler No More, which is no longer the obvious choice card to play, but is still very strong. You just have to make sure that after you clear the board, you have enough to stop them from coming back, since decks like Spright or Tears are just very explosive and can come back with seemingly little left. Then we have Eradicator Epidemic Virus, which is something that now can be easily resolved in Spright thanks to Sprint, which gives the deck a much easier and reliable way of summoning out Gigantic with 3200 attack, or in Runic builds this has always been pretty easy. Being able to get rid of spells or traps is strong, but just getting the hand information like a pointer did is really what takes this card over the top. Then we have the brand new card from Darkwing Blast in Kashtira Fenrir. Super expensive at the moment and is certainly a strong card, although it remains to be seen whether this amount of play was due to the initial hype of the set having just come out before the YCS. Being able to banish any card face down is certainly pretty unique, and a big body on its own makes it for a generic staple. Then we have Harpy's Feather Duster, which didn't see as much play this time around. No restrictions, so it's worth having, but really depends on how well your deck can play through back row. Lastly, we have the infamous Mystic Mind, where half of the list sided while the other half main decked this card if they played it. Slows the game down and wins games on its own. I think at this point I've just given up that Konami will ever ban this card. Alright guys, so that was it for the breakdown of YCS Minneapolis. Hope you enjoyed that. The addition of new generic cards from Darkwing Blast such as the Bystial cards and Fenrir is quite refreshing and will be interesting to see if they end up being mainstays in people's lists for years to come. As always, a big thanks to my Patreons, Eileen Dice Queen, Bolt Spider, Cybernetic, Brandon Jaren, Bear Lord, Spooky Boogie, Stephen Phillips, and my newest member, Chaz Blanks, as always for supporting the channel. You guys are truly amazing. If you're interested in joining my Patreon, link down below. Take care guys.